everyone, it's Dr. Mohib and we'll be going through fetal circulation. Placenta plays a key role in fetal circulation. It is a temporary yet important organ formed within the uterus of mother which allows exchange of materials between mother and fetus. It is connected to fetus via an umbilical cord. If we cut the umbilical cord and look at the transverse cross-section of an umbilical cord, we'll come to know that it consists of a single umbilical vein and two umbilical arteries. The oxygen status of umbilical artery and veins are different from other arteries and veins of our body. Usually, arteries carry oxygenated blood while veins carry deoxygenated blood. But in case of umbilical artery and veins, the umbilical artery carries deoxygenated blood while umbilical vein carries oxygenated blood. Now, the transfer of oxygen occurs via an umbilical vein. First of all, a highly oxygenated blood enters the fetus via umbilicus. Its oxygen saturation is very high, shown by dark red color. It reaches the hepatic circulation. At this place, it has two passages. One is connected with hepatic circulation and other is connected with inferior vena cava. The pressure within hepatic circulation is very high. This is due to increased resistance due to underdevelopment of hepatic circulation. Thus, umbilical vein blood bypasses the hepatic circulation and reaches the inferior vena cava. At inferior vena cava, due to mixing of some blood from hepatic circulation, drops the oxygen saturation from high to moderate, shown by light red color. At this point, the moderate O2 content blood moves from inferior vena cava into right atrium. From right atrium, the blood bypasses right ventricle and reaches left atrium via foramen ovale. From left atrium, it goes into left ventricle, from left ventricle into aorta and aortic arch, and then into descending aorta. The aortic arch supplies head and neck structures. Thus, head and neck structures has an oxygen supply of moderate content. The superior vena cava drains blood from head and neck, especially the deoxygenated blood or the blood with lowest O2 content. It reaches right atrium. From right atrium, it goes into right ventricle. From right ventricle, it goes into pulmonary artery. From pulmonary artery, it again has two passages. One is connected into aortic system via ductus arteriosus and other is connected to lungs. Now again, the pressure within lungs is very high due to increased resistance. Thus, blood bypasses lungs and mixes with aortic blood. The relation between oxygen and vessel dilation or constriction status exists within different parts differently. When oxygen delivery is decreased to other parts of our body, other parts other than lungs, there is localized vasodilation in order to maintain adequate oxygen delivery. But in lungs, when there is decreased O2 delivery, there is localized vasoconstriction. This localized vasoconstriction ensures that only those alveoli are perfused which have adequate oxygen supply. Thus, in fetus, since the oxygen status is low, thus it offers highest resistance. This occurs in fetus. The blood after mixing from head and neck, it goes and supplies rest of our body with low O2, especially the lower limbs. The blood from internal iliac arteries, it the umbilical arteries emerges from internal iliac arteries, draining blood into placenta. This was all about fetal circulation. Also, we have portal vein system. The portal vein system drains the deoxygenated or the blood with lowest oxygen status and finally mixes with umbilical vein blood. Now the question arises, how does low or moderate oxygen fulfill the demands of developing fetus? In order to understand this, we have to understand hemoglobin. Hemoglobin exists in two states: oxygenated state, which is also known as relaxed state, as well as deoxygenated state, also known as tensed state. The stability of deoxygenated state depends on 2,3-BPG. When 2,3-BPG binds tightly with the deoxygenated or tense state, it stabilizes it. We have two hemoglobins, hemoglobin A, also known as hemoglobin adult, and hemoglobin F, known as fetal hemoglobin. The hemoglobin A is made up of two alpha chains and two beta chains, while hemoglobin F is made up of two alpha chains and two gamma chains. The beta chains bind strongly with 2,3-BPG, thus stabilizing the deoxygenated states. In other words, the hemoglobin A has decreased affinity for oxygen, while hemoglobin F has gamma hemoglobin, which doesn't bind tightly with 2,3-BPG, thus destabilizing the tense state, which shifts to relaxed state in order to stabilize itself. Or in other words, the oxygen affinity for hemoglobin F is very high. Thus, the gamma chains of hemoglobin F ensures adequate transfer of oxygen from mother to fetus. Now let's review first aid. There are three important shunts within the fetal circulation. Shunt simply refers to bypass. Bypass. First is when umbilical vein via ductus venosus drains into inferior vena cava, thus bypassing hepatic circulation. Second is when most of the highly oxygenated blood from inferior vena cava via foramen ovale drains into left atrium, thus bypassing right ventricle. Third is when deoxygenated blood from superior vena cava drains into right atrium, then right ventricle, main pulmonary artery, and via ductus arteriosus into descending aorta, thus bypassing lungs. This shunt is due to increased fetal pulmonic artery resistance. Now what happens after birth or at birth? At birth, infant takes a deep breath. Now what happens? The oxygen saturation or oxygen content of lungs increases after birth, which results in decreased resistance of pulmonary vasculature. This occurs in infant. Thus, there is a decrease in resistance in pulmonary vasculature. This results in increase in left atrial pressure versus right atrial pressure. When the pressure decreases in lungs, this pressure is transferred down organs or down structures. So eventually this low resistance is transferred into right ventricle, which decreases its pressure, and eventually the pressure within right atrium also decreases, or in other words, the pressure within left atrium in comparison to right atrial pressure increases. This increase in left atrial pressure in comparison to right atrial pressure results in closing of foramen ovale, which is also called fossa ovalis. Now we have another structure known as ductus arteriosus. Ductus arteriosus is a connection between pulmonic artery and aorta. Now opening or patency of ductus arteriosus depends on two things. One thing is oxygen and other thing is prostaglandins. Now what happens? If you want to keep ductus arteriosus open, we have to keep the oxygen status or the O2 content low while the concentration of prostaglandins high. While if you want to keep ductus arteriosus closed, we have to keep the O2 concentration high and the concentration of prostaglandins low. So what happens after birth? After birth, the oxygen saturation increases while the prostaglandin concentration decreases. At birth, we have increase in O2 from respiration and decrease in prostaglandin production due to separation of placenta. This leads to closure of ductus arteriosus. Now, there are certain states when the ductus arteriosus doesn't close properly, or in other words, the closing or opening of ductus arteriosus after birth depends strictly on prostaglandin as the O2 content has already increased after birth. So, in order to close ductus arteriosus after birth, when in certain states the ductus arteriosus doesn't close properly, in such state we give NSAIDs which decrease prostaglandin and thus the ductus arteriosus close. NSAIDs like indomethacin or ibuprofen or acetaminophen help close the patent ductus arteriosus, also known as PDA, which becomes ligamentum arteriosum, a remnant of ductus arteriosus. The mnemonic for it is indomethacin ends the PDA. While if we want to keep the ductus arteriosus open, we have to keep the prostaglandins high. Prostaglandins E1 and E2 keep PDA open. It is its mnemonic. There are certain states, for instance, like transposition of great arteries. In this condition, we have to separate circulatory systems completely disconnected from each other. In such state, in order to buy time for surgery, we have to keep the ductus arteriosus open. So, in order to keep ductus arteriosus open, we give patients prostaglandins in order to maintain the patency of ductus arteriosus. Now let's review fetal and its postnatal derivatives of structures. Fetal postnatal derivatives. These are fetal structures and these are its postnatal derivatives. Now first of all, ductus arteriosus. Its postnatal derivative is or it becomes ligamentum arteriosum. It is located near the left recurrent laryngeal nerve or the left recurrent laryngeal nerve loops around ligamentum arteriosum. This is ligamentum arteriosum, which becomes this is ductus arteriosus, which becomes ligamentum arteriosum in adult or mature baby. Then we have ductus venosus, it becomes ligamentum venosum. This is ductus venosus and it becomes ligamentum venosum. Then we have foramen ovale, which becomes fossa ovalis. F and O, and again we have F and O. This is foramen ovale, an opening over here, and it becomes fossa ovalis, which is fibrous band. Then we have umbilical arteries, which becomes medial umbilical ligaments, and umbilical vein, which becomes ligamentum teres hepatis, also known as round ligament of liver, which is contained in falciform ligament of liver. This is umbilical vein, the whole umbilical vein, which becomes ligamentum teres hepatis. This is ligamentum teres hepatis connected to umbilicus. Then we have umbilical arteries, which becomes medial umbilical ligament. These are medial umbilical arteries, which becomes medial umbilical ligaments. And at last we have allantois, which becomes urachus, which finally becomes median umbilical ligament or urachus is a part of allantois which is located between bladder and umbilicus. If I give another view, this is the frontal view. This is median umbilical fold formed by median umbilical ligament, and this is medial, sorry, these are two medial umbilical folds formed by medial umbilical ligaments. At last we have allantois and urachus. Now what is allantois? Allantois is a fetal membrane that forms early in embryonic development. It is actually an outpouching of the yolk sac that is involved in early fluid exchange and blood vessels formation. And another structure known as urachus, it is actually a remnant of allantois which connects fetal bladder with an umbilicus, and it later on become median umbilical ligament. Now at last we have a memory checkpoint. Which of the following structures has the highest content of oxygen in blood? Is it umbilical artery, an umbilical vein, a left atrium, or a descending aorta? Pause the video and think about it, and the correct answer is umbilical vein. Thank you.